joys of the world behind. Night rested quietly over the hills surrounding Jerusalem. The final lanterns still burned inside small stone homes, while cool wind moved gently through olive trees growing beyond the city walls. Shepherds guided their flocks toward resting places beneath the stars, and distant voices carried softly through the sleeping valleys of Judea. It was a world shaped by prayer, a world where fathers blessed bread before meals, where merchants whispered psalms before long journeys, where old men sat beside oil lamps teaching children that wisdom begins with fearing God. And yet, even in such a world, human hearts remained restless. For from the beginning of time, mankind has struggled with the same quiet fear, the fear of wasting the life we have been given. Some men fear poverty, some fear sickness, some fear loneliness. But many souls carry a deeper fear they rarely speak aloud. The fear that they were created for something meaningful, yet may never become it. There are people who spend their entire lives sensing potential within themselves while never fully using it. A gift hidden beneath insecurity, wisdom buried beneath comparison, creativity suffocated by fear, faith weakened by comfort, and slowly, over many years, they begin accepting smaller lives than the ones God may have intended for them. Some blame the world, some blame other people, some convince themselves they were simply unlucky. But often the real prison is hidden much deeper, inside the heart, because fear has a strange power over human beings. It can make safety feel wiser than courage. It can make passivity look responsible. It can convince a soul that doing nothing is safer than risking failure. And so many people spend years protecting themselves from pain, while unknowingly protecting themselves from growth as well. In those days, wealthy masters often entrusted parts of their estates to servants while traveling abroad. Some servants multiplied what they received. Others managed only enough to survive. And some became so afraid of losing what they had that they buried opportunity beneath the earth itself. But this story is not truly about silver, nor gold, nor trade. It is a story about the human soul, about responsibility, about fear, about purpose, about what people choose to do with what God places into their hands. Because every person receives something: time, ability, compassion, intelligence, creativity, strength, sensitivity, faith. Some receive much, some receive little. But every soul receives enough to become responsible for something. And one day, whether rich or poor, powerful or forgotten, every human being must eventually face the same question. What did you do with what was entrusted to you? Did you multiply it? Did you hide it? Did you waste it? Did fear keep you from becoming who you were meant to be? Tonight's story begins in Jerusalem, during the years when merchants crowded narrow stone streets beneath the shadow of the temple. It begins in the household of a wealthy master, preparing for a long journey. And although none of his servants understood it yet, the journey ahead would reveal far more than their abilities. It would reveal the hidden condition of their hearts. The household awakened before sunrise. Servants crossed the courtyards carrying baskets of grain and jars of water, while cooks prepared bread over small fires beneath the cool morning air. Above the rooftops of Jerusalem, the eastern sky slowly brightened with soft gold light. The city was already beginning to move, merchants opened wooden stalls. Roman soldiers crossed narrow streets in pairs. Travelers arrived through the gates with camels and donkeys loaded with goods from distant lands. Jerusalem was alive long before the sun fully rose. Yet above the noise of the city, on the upper terrace of his household, the master stood alone in silence. He was an older man now. Years of leadership had shaped his face with lines carved by both hardship and wisdom. Though wealthy, he did not carry himself with arrogance like many men of status. Instead, he carried attentiveness. The master observed people carefully. He noticed the servant who worked faithfully even when unseen. He noticed the servant who spoke confidently yet avoided difficult responsibilities. He noticed hidden pride, hidden insecurity, hidden laziness. For many years he had learned an important truth. People often reveal their true character only after receiving responsibility. That morning, while the city stirred below, the master quietly called 3 servants forward. The first servant approached confidently. He was disciplined, intelligent, and ambitious. His movements carried natural energy, and many within the household respected his ability to solve problems quickly. The second servant approached more carefully. He was thoughtful and dependable, though quieter than the first. He rarely sought attention, yet completed his tasks faithfully. The third servant walked differently, slowly, cautiously, almost nervously. He obeyed instructions and avoided trouble, but something hidden lived constantly behind his eyes. Fear. Not the fear of physical danger, the fear of failure, the fear of making mistakes, the fear of being judged, the fear of risking embarrassment. The master had noticed it long ago, and perhaps because of that, he understood this servant better than the servant understood himself. The old man looked at the 3 of them carefully before speaking. "I will soon leave on a long journey," he said calmly. The servants lowered their heads respectfully. "And while I am gone, I will entrust portions of my estate to each of you." In those days, a talent represented enormous value. Years of labor, wealth capable of changing lives, responsibility that could not be treated carelessly. The master handed 5 talents to the first servant. The servant accepted them immediately, his eyes already filled with thoughts of possibility. Then the master handed 2 talents to the second servant. The man bowed respectfully, both honored and uncertain. Finally, the master handed 1 talent to the third servant. The servant accepted it carefully. But unlike the others, his first emotion was not gratitude. It was pressure, because responsibility often reveals what already exists inside the heart. The master noticed this immediately, yet he said nothing. For wisdom understands that some lessons cannot be taught through explanation alone. They must be lived. The city below continued moving endlessly. Merchants negotiated loudly. Children ran through crowded streets. Priests entered the temple courts for morning prayers. And somewhere beneath all the movement of Jerusalem lived the same invisible hunger that exists within people even today. The hunger to matter. The hunger to build something meaningful. The hunger to believe one's life was not wasted. The master stepped closer to his servants. "One day," he said quietly, "I will return." His words carried unusual weight. Not threatening, not angry, simply true. The first servant felt excitement. The second felt nervous determination. The third felt fear growing heavier inside his chest. Moments later, the master turned and began descending the road leading away from Jerusalem. The servants watched him disappear into the morning light, and though they did not yet realize it, that was the moment the true test began. The first servant wasted no time. While others in the household still discussed the master's departure, he had already begun planning. That very afternoon, he walked through the crowded marketplaces of Jerusalem, studying merchants, listening to conversations, and observing where opportunity moved through the city. The streets pulsed with life. Camel caravans arrived carrying spices from Arabia. Roman officials negotiated trade contracts near the upper district. Men shouted prices over baskets filled with figs, olives, and grain. To many people, the noise of the city felt overwhelming. But to the first servant, it felt alive with possibility. He understood something important. The talent entrusted to him was not merely money, it was trust. And trust demanded action. That evening, while lanterns flickered across Jerusalem, the servant sat alone beside a small wooden table covered in parchment and clay tablets. Carefully, he calculated prices, routes, risks, opportunities. Unlike many ambitious men, he did not act recklessly. He understood that wisdom and courage must walk together. For ambition without wisdom destroys people. But wisdom without action leaves potential buried forever. The servant prayed quietly before sleeping. "Lord," he whispered, "grant me wisdom to honor what has been placed into my hands." His prayer was not for comfort, not for safety, but for faithfulness. The following weeks demanded discipline. He traveled difficult roads outside Jerusalem to negotiate with traders bringing goods from neighboring regions. He woke before dawn and often worked long after nightfall. Some investments succeeded quickly, others failed. There were moments when anxiety touched him, moments when he questioned his decisions, moments when losses tempted him to retreat into caution. Yet unlike the third servant, fear did not control him. Because he understood something many people never learn. Growth always requires risk. Every meaningful life eventually demands courage. One evening, while traveling along a narrow road near Bethlehem, the servant stopped beside a fire where several merchants rested for the night. One older merchant studied him carefully. "You work as though something important depends upon it," the man observed. The servant nodded slowly. "It does." The merchant smiled. "Most men desire success," he said. "Very few are willing to carry the responsibility required for it." The words remained with the servant long after the conversation ended. Responsibility. That was the true weight of the talents. Not simply wealth. Responsibility to use wisely what had been entrusted to him. And perhaps that truth reaches far beyond silver itself. For every human being receives opportunities that require stewardship. Relationships, time, abilities, faith, creativity, and all of them either grow through faithful action or slowly disappear through neglect. Months passed. The servant's trades began multiplying steadily. 5 talents became 6, then 7, then more. His confidence grew, but not into arrogance. Instead, responsibility deepened him. He became wiser, more patient, more observant. Success was not simply changing his possessions, it was changing his character. Late one night, After returning from a long journey, the servant climbed the upper rooftop of the household and looked across Jerusalem beneath the stars. The city still glowed with movement. Torches burned along narrow streets. Voices echoed faintly through the darkness. Somewhere beyond the temple walls, psalms drifted softly into the night air. The servant closed his eyes briefly. For the first time, he began understanding something profound. Faithfulness was not about becoming important. It was about honoring what had been entrusted to him. And somewhere far away upon distant roads, the master continued traveling, unaware that the servant's talents were multiplying. But perhaps even more importantly, the servant himself was becoming more. The second servant carried his 2 talents differently. Where the first servant saw opportunity immediately, the second servant saw uncertainty. He was intelligent enough to understand the value of what had been placed into his hands. Yet every possibility seemed surrounded by invisible questions. What if he failed? What if he made the wrong decision? What if he lost what the master entrusted to him? Unlike the third servant, fear did not completely control him. But unlike the first servant, confidence did not come naturally. And so his struggle became quieter, more internal. Each morning, he walked through Jerusalem, studying merchants and listening carefully to negotiations. He observed how experienced traders moved through conversations with calm certainty. The second servant admired them, but deep inside himself, he constantly compared his own abilities to theirs. Comparison is a dangerous burden. It blinds people to their own gifts by forcing them to stare endlessly at the strengths of others. Many nights the servant prayed beneath the dim light of an oil lamp. "Lord," he whispered softly, "grant me wisdom and courage." Unlike the first servant, he did not dream of greatness. He simply feared wasting what had been entrusted to him. And perhaps that humility protected him. For humble people often grow slowly, but deeply. The servant began carefully trading small amounts of grain and olive oil between villages surrounding Jerusalem. His progress was not dramatic, not at first, but it was faithful. And with each small success, confidence slowly replaced fear, not pride, confidence. Because true confidence does not come from believing one is superior. It comes from learning that God can work even through imperfect people. One evening, after a successful journey, the servant sat quietly outside the city walls, watching sunset spread across the hills. For the first time in many months, peace entered his heart. Not because he had become wealthy, but because he had stopped allowing fear to decide his life. And slowly, without fully realizing it, he too was becoming more than he had once been. The third servant spent many days staring at the talent in silence. Unlike the others, he did not see possibility when he looked at it. He saw pressure, responsibility, risk. At night, while the city of Jerusalem echoed with movement and trade, the servant remained alone inside his small room, replaying fearful thoughts endlessly inside his mind. What if he lost the talent? What if thieves stole it? What if his decisions failed? What if the master returned disappointed? Fear has a way of disguising itself as wisdom. The servant convinced himself he was simply being cautious, careful, responsible. Yet deep beneath those excuses lived a painful truth. He feared failure more than he desired growth. One cold morning before sunrise, the servant quietly left the household, carrying the talent wrapped carefully in cloth. He walked beyond the outskirts of Jerusalem toward an empty field where few people traveled. The earth was dry beneath his feet. For a long moment, he stood silently looking around. Then slowly, he began digging. The hole was not large, but with every handful of dirt removed from the ground, something else was being buried as well. Potential, possibility, courage. The servant lowered the talent carefully into the earth. Then he covered it. When he finally stood again, relief washed over him. The danger was gone. No risk, no uncertainty, no possibility of failure. And because fear often feels safer than responsibility, the servant believed he had made the wise decision. Days passed, then weeks. The first servant traveled constantly. The second servant worked carefully and steadily. But the third servant remained mostly unchanged. He completed simple tasks around the household. He avoided difficult conversations. He watched others from a distance. Sometimes he saw the first servant returning from successful trades. Sometimes he overheard conversations praising the second servant's reliability. And quietly, bitterness began growing inside him. Not because the others harmed him, but because hidden fear often transforms into resentment toward those who keep moving forward. One evening, sitting alone beneath weak lantern light, the servant whispered softly to himself, "At least I cannot fail." Yet deep within his heart, another truth already waited silently. A man who refuses to risk failure may also refuse growth. And sometimes the safest life becomes the emptiest one. Jerusalem never truly rested. Even late into the night, movement continued through the narrow streets beneath the temple walls. Merchants argued over prices. Travelers searched for shelter. Roman soldiers crossed crowded marketplaces while priests prepared for morning sacrifices before dawn. The city pulsed endlessly with ambition. Some people chased wealth. Others chased power. Others chased recognition. And beneath all of it lived the same invisible hunger that follows humanity through every generation: the desire to matter. The first servant moved confidently through the noise of the city. He learned how to negotiate quickly, how to recognize dishonesty, how to study opportunities before others noticed them. The second servant moved more carefully. He listened more than he spoke. He learned slowly. He doubted himself often, but still, he continued moving. The third servant watched from a distance, and the longer he remained inactive, the heavier Jerusalem began feeling around him. The city itself became uncomfortable, because movement exposes passivity. Every crowded marketplace reminded him that others were building while he remained frozen. Every successful negotiation reminded him that fear had stolen something from him. One afternoon, while standing near the temple courtyard, the servant overheard two men speaking. "A gift unused eventually disappears," one old merchant said quietly. The words unsettled him deeply. He walked away quickly. But the sentence remained inside his mind long after the voices disappeared. That night, Jerusalem glowed beneath thousands of small lights. Music drifted through upper courtyards. Prayers echoed faintly through the temple district. Children laughed in narrow streets. The city was full of life. Yet inside the third servant, something had begun slowly dying. Not not his body, his courage. Because courage weakens when ignored for too long, and eventually fear begins feeling natural. The servant sat alone inside his room, listening to distant noise through the walls. For the first time, he wondered whether burying the talent had protected him or imprisoned him. Months passed. The first servant's success continued growing. The second servant matured steadily through discipline and perseverance. But the third servant remained trapped within the same invisible prison: fear. At first, he still believed he had acted wisely. He repeated the same thoughts to himself constantly. At least I protected what belonged to the master. At least I avoided dangerous risks. At least I cannot be blamed for losing anything. But deep within him, peace never came. Because fear may protect people from failure temporarily, but it also protects them from growth. The servant slowly became isolated. He avoided conversations about trade, avoided hearing about opportunity, avoided people whose courage reminded him of his own inactivity. And over time, inactivity began changing his heart. He became more critical, more defensive, more bitter toward those willing to take risks. That is one of fear's hidden dangers. It not only limits action, it slowly reshapes personality itself. One evening, while walking through Jerusalem near sunset, the servant passed several merchants discussing difficult journeys and failed investments. One man laughed softly. "Failure teaches wisdom faster than comfort ever can." The servant looked away immediately. Because people trapped by fear often believe mistakes are proof of weakness. They do not yet understand that growth almost always includes failure. That night, he returned once again to the field where the talent remained buried beneath the earth. He stood quietly over the hidden place. The ground looked unchanged, calm, safe, undisturbed. And yet something about the silence now felt unbearable. For the first time, he realized a painful truth. The buried talent was beginning to resemble his own soul. Hidden, unused, untouched by growth. The wind moved softly through the dry grass around him. And beneath the darkening sky of Judea, the servant felt a strange sorrow growing heavier inside his chest. Not because he had failed, but because he had never truly tried. Comparison followed people everywhere in Jerusalem, in marketplaces, in households, in prayer gatherings, even inside the temple courts. Men compared wealth, women compared beauty, merchants compared success, religious leaders compared status, and quietly, comparison poisoned many hearts. The second servant struggled with it often. Though his own work had begun succeeding steadily, he still measured himself constantly against the first servant. The first servant moved boldly, spoke confidently, expanded quickly. The second servant admired him, yet admiration slowly became insecurity. Some nights he sat alone wondering whether 2 talents had simply been proof that the master trusted him less. That thought wounded him more deeply than he wished to admit. Because many people secretly believe their worth depends upon how much they have been given. But wisdom understands something comparison cannot. Different callings require different measures. The first servant carried larger responsibilities. The second servant carried different ones. And neither life could be measured truthfully by comparing it to the other. One evening, while resting outside the city after a long journey, the second servant spoke honestly with an older often feel small beside others," he admitted quietly. The traveler studied him for a moment. "Then stop staring at other people's portions," the man replied. The servant lowered his eyes. The words struck deeply, because comparison had slowly stolen gratitude from him. And gratitude is difficult to maintain when the heart constantly measures itself against others. Meanwhile, the third servant's comparison had grown darker. He no longer simply doubted himself. He resented others. Every success around him became painful. Every courageous decision reminded him of what fear had stolen. And bitterness slowly replaced humility. That is another danger of hidden insecurity. Eventually, the soul stops merely feeling weak and begins secretly wishing others would fail as well. One night, while Jerusalem slept beneath cold stars, the third servant sat alone listening to distant laughter from neighboring homes. For a moment, he imagined what life might have become had he acted differently. But regret is a heavy companion. It does not change the past. It only reminds people how long fear has already controlled them. The servant closed his eyes tightly, and somewhere deep within him, shame continued growing. The first servant rarely slept long. Responsibility had changed him, not into a restless man consumed by greed, but into someone disciplined enough to carry difficult burdens faithfully. Long before sunrise, he often walked through Jerusalem reviewing plans in silence while much of the city still slept. Oil lamps flickered beside narrow streets. Temple guards moved quietly through upper courtyards. The cool air carried faint traces of smoke and olive wood. The servant had learned something important. Meaningful growth almost always requires unseen sacrifice. Many people admire success. Very few admire the lonely nights, difficult decisions, and exhaustion hidden behind it. The servant traveled often now. Some roads were dangerous, others exhausting. There were days of profit, days of setbacks, days when storms delayed entire caravans carrying valuable goods. Yet he continued faithfully. Not because he loved wealth itself, but because he understood the master had entrusted something valuable into his care, and faithful stewardship demanded perseverance. One cold evening, after returning from a difficult journey, the servant remained awake long after midnight, organizing records beneath dim lantern light. Outside, Jerusalem had grown quiet. The city's endless movement finally rested beneath darkness. The servant paused for a moment and looked toward the temple rising above the city. Soft torchlight glowed against its walls. And suddenly he realized something profound. The work itself had changed him more than the rewards ever could. Responsibility had sharpened his wisdom. Difficulties had strengthened his patience. Risk had deepened his courage. The talents were multiplying. But so was the servant himself. And perhaps that is one of life's deepest truths. God often uses responsibility not merely to build possessions, but to shape souls. The servant closed his eyes briefly, then quietly whispered a prayer into the stillness of the night. Lord, help me remain faithful. And beneath the silent stars above Jerusalem, the oil lamp continued burning while the servant worked patiently through the darkness. The third servant no longer visited the field often. At first, he checked the buried talent constantly, reassuring himself it remained safe beneath the earth. But eventually, even that stopped. The hidden treasure became something he tried not to think about at all. Because ignored responsibility slowly transforms into shame. And shame causes people to avoid whatever reminds them of their own fear. The servant's life became smaller, not physically, spiritually. He still moved through the household, still completed small tasks, still spoke politely when required. But inwardly, something had begun quietly collapsing. Days passed without purpose. Weeks passed without growth. The first servant expanded his work. The second servant slowly gained confidence. The third servant merely existed. And perhaps one of the saddest things that can happen to a human being is not dramatic destruction, but slow emotional surrender. The servant stopped imagining possibilities, stopped dreaming, stopped hoping. Fear had not only stolen his courage, it had stolen movement itself. One evening, while sitting alone inside his dim room, he noticed dust collecting upon unused tools near the wall. The sight unsettled him deeply, because suddenly he understood his own life resembled those tools, capable of use, yet untouched. Potential slowly fading beneath layers of neglect. Outside, Jerusalem remained alive. Children laughed in distant courtyards. Merchants prepared for tomorrow's trade. Pilgrims continued arriving through the city gates. Life moved forward relentlessly. But the servant remained frozen, and the longer he stayed frozen, the more impossible movement began feeling. That is one of fear's cruelest lies. The longer people avoid action, the more impossible action appears. Late that night, unable to sleep, the servant stepped outside beneath the stars. The air over Judea felt cold and empty. For a long time, he stood silently listening to distant sounds echoing through the sleeping city. Then, quietly, almost without realizing it, he whispered words he had avoided for many months. What have I become? The question disappeared into the darkness, and no answer came, only silence, heavy, uncomfortable, honest. News of the master's return spread through the household before sunrise. Servants moved anxiously through the courtyards, whispering to one another while preparations began throughout the estate. The master had returned to Jerusalem. After many months away, his journey was over. The first servant felt excitement immediately. The second servant felt nervous anticipation. But the third servant felt fear like cold stones settling inside his chest. For many nights he had tried avoiding thoughts about the master's return. Yet now the moment he feared most had finally arrived. Truth was coming. The city itself seemed different that morning. Jerusalem still pulsed with movement and trade, but for the servants, everything now carried unusual weight. Because responsibility eventually demands accountability. The first servant organized his records carefully. The second servant prayed quietly before entering the household. The third servant sat alone in silence. His thoughts raced endlessly. Perhaps the master would not ask many questions. Perhaps returning the talent untouched would be enough. Perhaps caution itself would be praised. Yet deep within him, another truth already waited. He knew he had not merely protected the talent, he had buried possibility itself. That afternoon, the master entered the household. Age and travel had marked him more deeply now, yet his eyes remained sharp and observant as ever. The servants bowed respectfully. For a long moment, the master simply looked around the estate in silence. He noticed everything. the changes, the growth, the atmosphere within the household. Then calmly, he called for the servants entrusted with his wealth. The first servant stepped forward immediately. The second servant followed. The third servant remained behind for a moment before finally forcing himself to move. His legs felt heavy. The room itself seemed quieter than usual. Outside, Jerusalem continued living its endless life. But inside the household, something far more personal was unfolding. The moment every human soul eventually faces, the moment of answering for one's life. The master sat quietly while the servants stood before him. And though his face revealed little emotion, his presence carried undeniable authority. Not harsh, not cruel, simply truthful. The first servant breathed deeply. The second servant lowered his eyes respectfully. The third servant felt panic tightening inside his chest, because buried things do not remain hidden forever. Eventually, every person must uncover what they chose to do with what was entrusted to them. And now, that moment had arrived. The first servant stepped forward confidently. In his hands, he carried the records of many months of labor, risk, discipline, and wise stewardship. The master looked at him calmly. "Well?" he asked. The servant bowed respectfully. "Master," he said, "you entrusted me with 5 talents. Through your trust and by God's favor, I have gained 5 more." He placed the records before the master. The room remained silent. Then slowly, the master smiled. Not with pride, not with surprise, but with deep satisfaction. "Well done," he said softly. "Good and faithful servant." The words carried warmth far greater than wealth itself. For faithful people often desire one thing more than reward: to know their labor mattered. The master continued, "You were faithful over little. I will entrust you with much more. Enter into the joy of your master." The servant lowered his head deeply. Relief and gratitude flooded his heart, not merely because the talents had multiplied, but because the journey itself had transformed him. The responsibility had sharpened his wisdom. Difficulties had deepened his patience. Courage had strengthened his character. Then the second servant stepped forward. His hands trembled slightly, not from guilt, from humility. "Master," he said quietly, "you entrusted me with 2 talents. I have gained 2 more." The master studied him carefully. Then once again, the same words filled the room. "Well done, good and faithful servant." The second servant felt emotion rise unexpectedly inside him. For many months he had doubted himself, compared himself, questioned whether he was enough. Yet the master did not compare him to the first servant. He measured faithfulness, not portion, and perhaps that truth reaches deeply into the human soul, because people spend much of life comparing gifts, while God often measures stewardship. The second servant suddenly understood something beautiful. His value had never depended upon receiving the largest portion, only upon using faithfully what had already been placed into his hands. Peace settled deeply within him. A peace comparison had stolen for many years. The master welcomed him warmly, and for a brief moment, joy filled the household. But beneath that joy remained another silence, still waiting to speak. The third servant had not yet stepped forward. and fear was already tightening around his heart like chains. The third servant approached slowly. His breathing felt shallow. Every step toward the master seemed heavier than the last. In his hands he carried the single talent, now uncovered from the earth where it had remained hidden for many months. Dirt still clung to its surface. The sight alone revealed the truth before words were even spoken. The room grew quiet. The servant swallowed hard before finally speaking. "Master," his voice trembled. "I knew you were a demanding man, reaping where you did not sow, and gathering where you scattered no seed." The master listened silently. The servant continued quickly. "And because I was afraid, I hid your talent in the ground." For a moment, he hesitated, then lifted the talent carefully forward. "Here is what belongs to you." Silence followed, heavy, uncomfortable. The first and second servants lowered their eyes, because deep down, everyone in the room understood something painful. The issue was never truly the money. It was fear. The servant stood frozen beneath the master's gaze, and for the first time in many months, excuses no longer comforted him. Fear had once sounded reasonable inside his mind. Safe, careful, practical. But standing there now, with the dirt-covered talent exposed before everyone, he suddenly saw the truth clearly. Fear had not protected him. It had imprisoned him. The servant's hands shook slightly. He realized how many months had been wasted, how many opportunities had disappeared, how much of himself had slowly withered beneath passivity. And perhaps the deepest pain was this: he had not failed because he tried and lost. He had failed because he never truly lived at all. The room remained still. Outside, faint sounds of Jerusalem drifted through the distant streets. Life continued moving. But inside the household, truth now stood fully uncovered. The buried talent lay exposed between them, and so did the buried condition of the servant's soul. The master looked at the servant for a long moment before speaking. There was no cruelty in his face, but neither was there approval, only truth. "You feared failure so deeply," the master said quietly, "that you chose not to act at all." The servant lowered his head. Every word pierced deeply, because he knew the master spoke truth. The old man continued, "If you truly understood responsibility, you would have done something with what was entrusted to you." The servant's chest tightened. Something. Not perfection, not greatness, simply movement. The master stepped closer. "You buried possibility beneath fear." The sentence settled heavily across the room, and perhaps it reaches beyond the story itself. For many people spend years burying gifts beneath insecurity, burying creativity, burying wisdom, burying compassion, burying purpose. Not because they lack ability, but because fear convinces them safety matters more than faithfulness. The master lifted the talent from the servant's trembling hands, then turned toward the others. "Give this to the servant who has 10 talents." The room stirred quietly. The third servant closed his eyes. Shame flooded through him. Not because he had little, but because he finally understood how much had been wasted. The master's voice softened slightly. "Those who use faithfully what they are given continue growing, but those who bury what they possess eventually lose even the little they have." The words carried painful wisdom, because unused gifts weaken over time. Unused courage disappears. Unused purpose slowly fades. And eventually the soul forgets who it once could have become. The servant stood silently. No defense remained, only regret. Outside, evening light slowly spread across Jerusalem. The city continued moving beneath the fading sky. But inside the servant, something had collapsed forever. Not because the master was cruel, but because truth itself can feel devastating when a person finally sees how long fear has controlled their life. Weeks passed after the master's return. Life within the household slowly settled once again into rhythm and routine. Yet something had changed permanently inside the faithful servants. Responsibility had transformed them. The first servant no longer saw wealth merely as success. He had learned patience, discipline, wisdom, humility. The difficult roads, sleepless nights, failures, and risks had shaped him into someone stronger than the man who first received the talents. And the second servant had changed perhaps even more deeply. Once consumed by insecurity and comparison, he now carried quiet peace within himself. He no longer measured his worth against others, because he had discovered something comparison could never teach. Faithfulness matters more than portion. One evening, both servants stood together overlooking Jerusalem while sunset spread across the hills of Judea. The city glowed beneath warm gold light. Children ran through narrow streets. Smoke rose gently above evening fires. Temple prayers drifted softly through the air. For a long moment, neither servant spoke. Then quietly, the second servant asked, "Do you ever think about how different our lives might have become if fear had stopped us?" The first servant nodded slowly. Yes. The answer lingered between them, because both men understood something deeply now. Growth always demands courage. Not reckless courage, faithful courage. The kind willing to move forward despite uncertainty. The master eventually entrusted them with even greater responsibilities. But strangely, by then the responsibilities mattered less than the transformation itself. Because faithful stewardship had not merely multiplied wealth, it had expanded their souls. And perhaps that is one of life's hidden mysteries. God often gives people responsibilities not only to build outcomes, but to shape who they become while carrying them. The evening wind moved softly through the city, and beneath the fading light of sunset, peace rested quietly upon the hearts of the servants who had chosen faithfulness over fear. The third servant became quieter after the judgment. He still moved through the household, still completed simple duties, still spoke politely when required. But inwardly, regret followed him constantly. Not loud regret, the quiet kind, the kind that appears late at night when the world finally becomes silent. Sometimes he walked alone through Jerusalem, watching merchants negotiate passionately in crowded marketplaces. Other times he watched laborers building homes beneath the hot Judean sun. Everywhere he looked, people were moving, trying, building, failing, growing. And suddenly he understood something painful. The tragedy of his life had not been failure. It had been avoidance. Fear had convinced him safety was wisdom. But now he saw the truth clearly. A life spent hiding from risk eventually becomes a life never fully lived. Late one evening, the servant returned once more to the empty field where the talent had once remained buried. The earth looked ordinary now. Wind moved softly through dry grass beneath the stars. For a long time he stood silently staring at the ground, then slowly lowered himself to his knees. And for the first time in many months, he wept, not because wealth was gone, but because he finally saw what fear had stolen from him: possibility, growth, purpose. Years earlier, he believed burying the talent would protect him from pain. Yet pain had arrived anyway. Only now it carried the weight of regret. The servant lowered his head into his hands, and beneath the silent sky of Judea, he whispered words filled with sorrow. I was alive, but never truly living. The wind carried the sentence softly into the darkness, and somewhere far beyond the city walls, another dawn slowly prepared to rise. Stories survive through generations because they speak about more than the people inside them. They speak about us. And perhaps that is why this parable continues touching human hearts thousands of years later. Because every person eventually becomes one of the servants. Some move courageously through life, multiplying what they receive through faithfulness and perseverance. Others struggle quietly with insecurity while still continuing forward step by step. And many bury parts of themselves beneath fear. People bury creativity, dreams, calling, faith, love. Sometimes because of rejection, sometimes because of comparison, sometimes because failure feels unbearable. But hidden potential rarely disappears peacefully. It lingers within the soul, quietly reminding people of who they might have become. Modern life is filled with distractions powerful enough to keep people from hearing those deeper questions. Noise, entertainment, comparison, constant movement. Yet eventually silence arrives. And within silence, many people begin confronting the same uncomfortable truth. Fear has shaped more of their life than they ever realized. There are people who spend years waiting to feel fully confident before acting. Yet confidence often appears only after movement begins. There are people who believe they must become extraordinary before their life matters. Yet faithfulness in small things often shapes the soul far more deeply than dramatic success. And there are people who protect themselves so carefully from failure that they accidentally protect themselves from growth as well. There are men who once dreamed of building beautiful things, yet buried their creativity beneath doubt. There are women who carried kindness powerful enough to heal wounded people, yet fear convinced them to remain silent. There are souls who spent years praying for purpose, while hiding from every opportunity placed before them. And slowly, many begin accepting lives far smaller than the ones they were capable of living. Not because God abandoned them, but because fear convinced them to abandon themselves first. Perhaps tonight this story asks something deeply personal. What has been placed into your hands? What abilities? What opportunities? What relationships? What dreams? And what has fear convinced you to bury? Perhaps you once carried passion that slowly disappeared beneath exhaustion. Perhaps comparison stole your courage. Perhaps disappointment taught you to stop trying. Perhaps you became so focused on avoiding pain that you also avoided becoming fully alive. These questions are uncomfortable, but sometimes uncomfortable questions become the beginning of awakening. moment a soul finally sees the truth clearly, change quietly becomes possible. The first servant was not fearless. The second servant was not perfect. They simply continued moving despite uncertainty. And perhaps courage is not the absence of fear after all. Perhaps courage is simply choosing movement while fear still whispers inside the heart. Tonight, somewhere beyond the noise of the world, this story leaves one final invitation resting quietly before you. Do not bury the life God placed inside you. Even small faithfulness can transform a soul. Even uncertain steps can lead people toward purpose. And perhaps the greatest tragedy is not failing while trying, but never truly trying at all. And so the story ends not with silver, but with reflection. 3 servants stood before the same master. 3 servants received responsibility. 3 servants faced fear differently. And through them, the story quietly reveals something about every human soul. Some people spend their lives multiplying what they are given through courage, discipline, and faithfulness. Others move slowly and imperfectly, yet continue growing because they refuse to surrender completely to fear. And some bury themselves emotionally long before life itself ever ends. Not because they lacked potential, but because fear convinced them remaining safe mattered more than becoming fully alive. Perhaps the deepest tragedy is not failure. Perhaps it is reaching the end of life, realizing we never truly used what was already inside us. The world today looks different from ancient Jerusalem, yet human hearts remain remarkably similar. People still compare themselves constantly, still fear rejection, still avoid risks, still wonder whether their lives truly matter. And many quietly carry gifts they no longer believe are valuable. There are people listening tonight who still carry hidden dreams inside them. Dreams buried years ago beneath disappointment, beneath criticism, beneath insecurity, beneath exhaustion. Yet perhaps those things were never fully dead, only hidden. The servant buried his talent beneath the earth because he believed protecting himself mattered more than trusting the master. And many people do the same with their own souls. They hide love because they fear heartbreak, hide creativity because they fear judgment, hide faith because they fear rejection, hide purpose because they fear failure. And slowly, life becomes smaller, safer perhaps, but smaller. Yet the story offers another possibility. You do not need another person's portion. You do not need perfect confidence. You do not need certainty about every step ahead. You only need willingness to stop burying what was already placed within you. Not perfectly, faithfully. Perhaps tonight, as silence settles gently around you, there is one final question worth carrying quietly into your heart. What parts of your life have you buried beneath fear? What dreams, what compassion, what creativity, what faith, and what might happen if you finally uncovered them? The night over Judea eventually grew still. Lanterns dimmed, markets emptied, voices faded into silence. But somewhere beneath the stars, the deeper question of the story remained alive. Not what we were given, but what we chose to do with it. And perhaps, somewhere within that silence, a soul finally begins choosing courage over fear. Perhaps someone listening tonight quietly decides to try again, to believe again, to build again, to pray again, to live again, because the master Master still entrusts gifts to imperfect people. And perhaps grace was never meant only for those who succeed greatly, but also for those willing to stop hiding. The wind moved softly across the hills surrounding Jerusalem, and beneath countless silent stars, the story finally came to rest. Not as a lesson about money, but as a question about the human soul. If this story brought peace to your heart tonight, you can continue your rest with another peaceful biblical story from our playlist. Subscribe and return whenever your soul needs stillness. Together, we can make this place grow into a quiet sanctuary for many restless hearts.